I'm Liana, and the day they excluded me from the family photo for not looking like them was the day I learned how deeply a wound could cut without drawing blood. It wasn't just a photo, it was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand by the people who were supposed to love me most. My family stood there all smiles and matching features, while I was asked to step aside because my face, my skin, my existence didn't fit their perfect picture. I was 16, and that moment carved itself into my soul, a scar I'd carry for years. But scars, I'd later learn, can guide you to truths you never expected, like the DNA results that arrived years later and turned their world upside down. I grew up in a small town in Georgia, where the air was thick with humidity and the weight of tradition. My family was the kind everyone admired, church-going, tight-knit, the kind who hosted barbecues that drew half the neighborhood. My parents, Clara and James, were the pillars of it all. My older sister, Bethany, was their pride, with her golden hair and hazel eyes that mirrored our mother's. My younger brother, Caleb, had our father's broad shoulders and easy laugh. And then there was me, Liana, the odd one out. My skin was a shade darker, my hair a wild cascade of curls that defied every brush, and my eyes, a deep brown, seemed to belong to someone else entirely. I didn't look like them, and they never let me forget it. It started with small things, the kind you brush off as a kid because you don't know any better. "Liana, why don't you straighten your hair like Bethany's?" my mother would say, her tone sharp with disappointment. "You'd look so much prettier." My father would chuckle when neighbors mistook me for a cousin or a friend's kid, never correcting them. Bethany, 4 years older, would roll her eyes when I tried to tag along with her friends, muttering, "You don't even look like my sister." Caleb, too young to understand, would parrot what he heard: Liana's different. Different. That word became my shadow, following me everywhere. By the time I was a teenager, the comments weren't so subtle anymore. At family gatherings, aunts and uncles would whisper about my exotic features, as if I were some puzzle to be solved. My grandmother, Nana Rose, was the only one who never made me feel like an outsider. She'd pull me close, her hands, weathered but warm, and say, "You're a masterpiece, Liana. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But even Nana Rose couldn't shield me from the growing distance between me and the rest of the family. I was loved in a way, but it was a conditional love tethered to their expectations of who I should be. The family photo incident happened the summer before my junior year of high school. It was our annual reunion, held at my parents' sprawling backyard, where the pecan trees swayed lazily and the smell of smoked ribs hung in the air. The reunion was a big deal. 3 generations of our family, plus cousins and in-laws, all gathered to celebrate our legacy. My mother had hired a professional photographer that year, determined to capture a timeless portrait to hang in the living room. Everyone was dressed in coordinated outfits, white linen for the women, khaki for the men. I'd spent hours trying to tame my curls, hoping for once to blend in. As we gathered on the lawn, the photographer arranged us in rows, fussing over angles and lighting. I stood next to Bethany, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was my family, my place, and I wanted to belong. But then my mother stepped forward, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Liana, honey," she said, her voice low but firm, "why don't you sit this one out? We want the photo to match." I froze, the words sinking in like a slow poison. Match. She meant they wanted everyone to look alike. Blonde, fair-skinned, hazel-eyed. Not me. I opened my mouth to protest, but no sound came out. My father, standing nearby, avoided my gaze. Bethany smirked, adjusting her dress as if nothing had happened. Caleb, confused, tugged at my hand, but my mother waved him into place. The photographer, sensing the tension, hesitated, but my mother's sharp nod sent him back to work. I stepped aside, my face burning, and watched as my family posed without me. The camera clicked, capturing their smiles, their unity, their world, a world I wasn't allowed to be part of. I ran to the house, tears streaming down my face, and locked myself in my room. The sounds of laughter and music from the reunion drifted through the window, mocking me. I felt like I was drowning in shame, in rejection, in the unbearable truth that my own family didn't want me. I looked in the mirror, hating every feature that set me apart. My curls, my skin, my eyes. Why couldn't I be like them? Why couldn't I be enough? Nana Rose found me, later sitting on the floor with my knees pulled to my chest. She didn't say much, just sat beside me and handed me a glass of sweet tea. "They're wrong, Liana," she said finally, her voice steady. "Not you." I wanted to believe her, but the pain was too raw, too deep. That night, I lay awake replaying the moment over and over. I didn't know it then, but that rejection would become the spark that set my life on a different path, one I'd have to forge alone. School started a few weeks later, and I threw myself into my studies, desperate for a distraction. I was a good student, always had been, but now I was driven by something fiercer. Anger, maybe, or the need to prove I was more than the girl who didn't match. My English teacher, Ms. Harper, noticed the change. She was a Black woman in her 40s with a quiet strength and a knack for seeing through people's walls. One day after class, she pulled me aside. "You've got fire in you, Liana," she said, handing me a flyer. "For a statewide essay contest, use it." I poured my heart into that essay, writing about identity, about feeling like an outsider in my own skin. It was raw, messy, and probably too honest, but it felt like a release. When I won first place, I was stunned. The award ceremony was held in Atlanta, and for the first time, I felt seen not as someone's sister or daughter, but as Liana, a girl with a voice. My parents came, but their pride felt hollow, like they were performing for the crowd. Bethany didn't bother to show up. Still standing on that stage, holding my certificate, I felt a flicker of something new, hope. But hope is fragile, and mine was tested over the next few years. High school was a battlefield of cliques and gossip, and I was an easy target. Girls like Bethany, popular, polished, made sure I knew my place. "You're adopted, right?" They'd ask, their smiles sharp as knives. "No way you're related to her." I'd laugh it off, but each comment chipped away at me. At home, things didn't get better. My mother's criticism grew sharper, my father's silence louder. I started to wonder if they regretted having me, if I was a mistake they couldn't undo. Nana Rose was my anchor through it all. She'd tell me stories about her own life, how she'd faced prejudice as a young woman, how she'd fought to be respected. "You don't need their approval," she'd say, her eyes fierce. "You need your own." Her words kept me going, but they couldn't erase the loneliness. I felt like I was living on the edges of my family, my town, my life, always looking and never truly belonging. By my senior year, I was counting down the days until I could leave. I applied to colleges far from Georgia, dreaming of a fresh start. And when I got accepted to a small liberal arts school in Massachusetts with a partial scholarship, I cried not just from joy, but from relief. I was getting out. I was going to be someone new. But even as I packed my bags, a part of me wondered, would I ever be enough for them? Would I ever be enough for myself? The DNA test came later, almost by accident, but it would change everything. I didn't know it then, but the truth was waiting, ready to unravel the lies I'd been told my whole life. And when it did, I'd finally understand why I'd always felt like a stranger in my own family, and why their rejection was never about me. College was supposed to be my escape, a chance to rewrite my story in a place where no one knew the girl who didn't match. I arrived at the small Massachusetts campus in the fall, my suitcase heavy with clothes, and my heart heavier with hope and fear. But the air was crisp, nothing like the sticky Georgia summers, and the campus buzzed with students who seemed so sure of themselves. I was 18, alone and terrified, but I told myself this was my chance to build a life that wasn't defined by rejection. I didn't know then that the wounds I carried would follow me, or that healing would be a battle I'd have to fight one small painful step at a time. My dorm was a cramped double, and my roommate Aisha was a whirlwind of energy from Brooklyn. She had a laugh that filled the room and a habit of leaving her art supplies everywhere. At first, I kept my distance, afraid to let anyone in. I'd learned to protect myself by staying quiet, blending into the background. But Aisha wasn't the type to let walls stand. One night when I was hunched over my desk, struggling with a history paper, she plopped onto my bed and said, "Girl, you look like you're carrying the world. Want to talk?" I didn't, not really, but her warmth cracked something open. And before I knew it, I was telling her about the family photo, the comments, the way I'd never felt like I belonged. Aisha listened, her eyes wide, and when I finished, she didn't offer pity. Instead, she said, "They don't get to decide who you are, Liana. You do." Her words echoed Nana Rose's, and though they didn't erase the ache, they planted a seed. Aisha became my first real friend, the kind who saw me not the different girl, but me. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, our fears, and the messy beauty of starting over. With her, I started to laugh again, to feel a little less like an outsider. But college wasn't a fairy tale. The scholarship covered tuition, but I worked 2 jobs: barista at a campus coffee shop and tutor at the writing center to afford books and meals. Exhaustion became my constant companion, and there were days when I wondered if I'd made a mistake leaving home. The distance from my family didn't erase their voices in my head. My mother's calls were rare, and when they came, they were laced with subtle jabs. "Are you keeping up with your classes?" Bethany never had trouble. My father sent short texts, always about money or grades, never asking how I was. Bethany was too busy with her perfect life, engaged to a lawyer posting curated photos online, to bother with me. Caleb, now a teenager, was the only one who seemed to miss me, but his messages were sporadic, caught up in his own world. The loneliness hit hardest at night, when the campus was quiet and my thoughts were loud. I'd lie in bed replaying that moment on the lawn, the way my mother's words had sliced through me. I started to doubt myself, my worth, my place, my future. What if I wasn't enough? What if I failed here too? Those questions gnawed at me, and there were moments when I wanted to give up, to go back to Georgia and accept the life they'd planned for me, small, safe, and visible. Ms. Harper's memory saved me. I'd kept in touch with her, sending occasional emails about college life. One day when I was feeling particularly lost, she wrote back, "Liana, you've got a gift for words and a heart that won't quit. Don't let their shadows dim your light." She suggested I join the campus literary magazine, and though I hesitated, I submitted a poem on a whim. It was about feeling like a stranger in your own skin, and when it was published, I felt a spark of pride I hadn't known in years. The magazine's editor, a senior named Javier, invited me to join the team. For the first time, I had a place where my voice mattered. Writing became my lifeline. I poured my pain into poems, essays, stories, every word away, to reclaim the pieces of myself I'd lost. Javier, with his quiet encouragement and sharp feedback, pushed me to dig deeper. "You're not just writing," he'd say, "you're telling the truth." The truth was messy, raw, and sometimes too heavy to carry, but putting it on paper made it bearable. Through the magazine, I met other writers, artists, dreamers, people who didn't care about fitting in, who saw my differences as strengths. Slowly, I started to see them that way too. But the past wasn't done with me. That winter, I went home for Christmas, my first time back since leaving for college. I dreaded it, but Nana Rose had been sick, and I couldn't bear the thought of not seeing her. The house felt smaller, the air thick with tension. My mother fussed over Bethany's wedding plans, barely acknowledging me. My father asked about my grades, then changed the subject. Caleb was glued to his phone, and Bethany, radiant in her engagement glow, treated me like an afterthought. At dinner, I sat quietly, feeling like a guest in my own home. Nana Rose was the only one who made it bearable. She was frailer now, her hands trembling as she poured tea, but her eyes still held that fierce love. "You're blooming, Liana," she said, squeezing my hand. "Don't let them clip your wings." We talked for hours, and she told me something that stuck with me. Sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about who sees you. Her words carried me through the visit, but they couldn't shield me from the moment that broke my heart all over again. It happened on Christmas Eve during the family's annual photo by the fireplace. I'd avoided it the past few years, but this time I thought maybe things would be different. I was wrong. As we gathered, my mother handed me the camera. "Liana, why don't you take the picture?" she said, her tone casual but cutting. I froze, the weight of that summer day crashing back. Bethany smirked. Caleb looked uncomfortable, and my father said nothing. I took the camera, my hands shaking, and snapped the photo. They smiled, perfect and united, while I stood outside their frame, invisible again. I left Georgia the next day, cutting my visit short. On the plane, I cried silently, promising myself I'd never go back. The rejection wasn't new, but it hurt just as much, maybe more, because I dared to hope. Back at school, I threw myself into my work, my writing, my friendships. Aisha and Javier became my family, the ones who saw me. I started to believe I could build a life without my family's approval. But the pain lingered, a quiet ache that surfaced in the stillness. That spring, something unexpected happened. Aisha, always curious, convinced me to take a DNA test. "It's just for fun," she said, waving her own kit. "Maybe you'll find out you're secretly royalty." I laughed, but the idea stirred something in me. I'd always wondered why I looked so different, why my family treated me like an anomaly. I sent in the sample, not expecting much. Weeks later, the results arrived, and when I opened them, my world tilted. The report showed I was 40% West African, 30% Native American, and only 20% European. Nothing like the profiles my family proudly claimed, all European descent with a touch of Southern pride. There was more, a family tree with names I didn't recognize, connections to people I'd never met. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding. Was this why I'd always felt like a stranger? Was there a truth my family had hidden? I called Nana Rose, my voice trembling as I told her about the results. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "Liana, there's something I need to tell you. Come home this summer." Her tone was heavy, and I knew whatever she had to say would change everything. I spent the rest of the semester in a daze, torn between fear and a burning need to know the truth. My family had excluded me for years, but now I had proof I was different, and maybe, just maybe, that difference held the key to understanding why. The summer after my freshman year, I returned to Georgia with a knot in my stomach and a DNA report burning a hole in my backpack. Nana Rose's cryptic words had haunted me for months, and I knew whatever she had to tell me would either mend the cracks in my heart or shatter it completely. The plane ride felt endless, each mile pulling me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. I'd spent so long trying to escape my family's rejection, but now I was walking back into their world, armed with questions I couldn't ignore. Why didn't I look like them? Why had they always treated me like I didn't belong? And what did Nana Rose know that she'd kept hidden all these years? The house was the same as always, white clapboard wraparound porch. The pecan trees standing sentinel in the yard, but it felt different, like I was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. My mother greeted me with a stiff hug, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You look tired, Liana," she said already, turning to fuss over something in the kitchen. My father nodded from the couch, his attention fixed on a baseball game. Caleb, now taller and gangly, gave me a quick wave before disappearing to his room. Bethany was gone off on her honeymoon, but her absence didn't soften the tension. I was back, but I wasn't home, not really. Nana Rose was waiting for me in her small apartment above the garage, a space she'd claimed after my grandfather passed. She'd looked frailer than I remembered, her silver hair thinner, her hands trembling as she poured tea. But her eyes were sharp, filled with a mix of love and something heavier, regret, maybe, or fear. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of her old clock. Finally, she took my hand and said, "Liana, you deserve the truth. But it's not an easy one." She told me a story I never could have imagined. My mother, Clara, had always been the perfect daughter, the one who followed every rule, who carried the family's pride like a crown. But when she was 19, she fell in love with a man who didn't fit their world. A black artist named Marcus who'd come to town for a summer painting murals for a community center. He was vibrant, talented, and kind, Nana Rose said, but to my grandparents, he was unacceptable. They forbade the relationship, threatening to cut Clara off if she didn't end it. Clara, torn between love and duty, chose her family. Marcus left town and Clara married my father James a year later. But there was more. Clara had been pregnant when Marcus left, not with Bethany, who came later, but with me. Nana Rose's voice broke as she explained Clara had hidden the pregnancy as long as she could, ashamed and terrified of what it would mean. When I was born, my features, darker skin, curly hair, brown eyes, were a stark reminder of Marcus. My grandparents, desperate to protect their reputation, pressured Clara to give me up. But Nana Rose refused to let that happen. She insisted I be raised as part of the family, even if it meant living a lie. So they told everyone I was Clara and James's daughter, and James, bound by duty, went along with it. The lie held, but it came at a cost me. I sat there stunned as the pieces fell into place. The whispers, the exclusion, the way I'd always felt like an outsider. It wasn't just about my looks. It was because I was a secret, a truth they'd buried to save face. My mother's coldness, my father's distance, Bethany's cruelty. They weren't just rejecting me, they were rejecting the part of my mother's past they couldn't erase. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, betrayal, grief for a father I'd never known, and a strange, aching relief. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy. I didn't belong, because in a way, I never had. Nana Rose handed me an old photo edges, worn from years of handling. It showed a young man with a warm smile, paint-splattered jeans, and eyes that looked eerily like mine. "This is Marcus," she said. "He never knew about you." Clara made sure of that. I traced his face with my finger, feeling a connection I couldn't explain. He was part of me, and they'd taken him away, not just from me, but from himself. I wanted to hate my mother, my grandparents, everyone who'd lied. But all I felt was a deep, hollow sadness. I spent the rest of the summer wrestling with what I'd learned. Part of me wanted to confront my mother, to demand answers, but Nana Rose begged me to wait. "She's not ready," she said, and I wasn't sure I was either. Instead, I leaned on Nana Rose, who became my bridge to the past. She told me stories about Marcus, his art, his laugh, the way he'd made my mother come alive. She gave me a small sketchbook he'd left behind, filled with drawings of flowers and faces, each one vibrant and alive. Holding it felt like holding a piece of myself. Back at college, I threw myself into my studies and writing with a new intensity. The truth about my origins didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a strange kind of clarity. I wasn't just fighting to prove myself to my family anymore. I was fighting to understand who I was. Aisha and Javier noticed the change. "You're different," Aisha said one night, as we sat in our dorm with takeout and bad reality TV. "Like you're free." I wasn't free, not yet, but I was starting to see a path forward, one I'd have to carve myself. I joined a campus group for students of color, something I'd avoided before because I wasn't sure where I fit. There I met people who understood the struggle of navigating identity in a world that wanted to box you in. I started writing about my experience first in poems, then in essays that I shared at open mics. Each time I spoke, I felt a little stronger, a little more like the girl Marcus might have been proud of. But the anger lingered simmering beneath the surface. I was angry at my mother for choosing shame over love, at my father for his silence at a family that had built its unity on a lie. That fall, I took a bold step. I submitted an essay about my DNA results to a national writing contest. It was raw, unfiltered, and terrifying to share, but I wanted to own my story, not hide from it. When I won second place, I was invited to read at a conference in New York. Standing on that stage, my voice shaking but steady, I told a room full of strangers about the family photo, the lies, the truth I'd uncovered. The applause was deafening, but what mattered more was the feeling inside me, a sense of power of claiming my place in the world. The essay caught the attention of a professor who offered me a mentorship, helping me refine my writing and connect with other young writers. I started to dream bigger, not just of surviving, but of thriving. I applied for scholarships, internships, anything that could take me further from the girl who'd been left out of the photo. But even as I built this new life, I couldn't shake the pull of the past. I wanted answers not just from Nana Rose, but from my mother. I wanted to know why she'd let me grow up feeling like a mistake. By my junior year, I was balancing classes, the literary magazine, and a part-time job at a local bookstore. I was exhausted but alive, surrounded by people who believed in me. Aisha was applying to grad school, Javier was planning a gap year to travel, and I was starting to imagine a future where I could be a writer, a voice for others who felt unseen. But the question of Marcus lingered. Was he still out there? Did he have a family? A life, a story I could be part of? I started searching online using the names from my DNA results, but found nothing. Still, I held on to his sketchbook, a reminder that I was more than my family's rejection. Nana Rose called me one night, her voice weak but urgent. "Liana, I'm not going to be here forever," she said. "You need to talk to your mama, not for her, but for you." I knew she was right, but the thought of facing my mother terrified me. What if she denied it? What if she didn't care? The truth had set me on a path, but it hadn't healed me, not yet. I promised Nana Rose I'd come home for the holidays, not just to see her, but to finally ask the questions I'd been carrying for years. The holidays of my junior year loomed like a storm on the horizon, and I knew I couldn't avoid the confrontation any longer. Nana Rose's words echoed in my mind, not for her, but for you. I'd spent years building a life that didn't depend on my family's approval. But the truth about my origins, about Marcus, about the lie they'd all upheld, demanded answers. I wasn't the scared girl who'd been pushed out of the family photo anymore, but the thought of facing my mother still made my heart race. I wanted to know why she'd let me grow up, feeling like a mistake, why she'd chosen shame over love. And more than anything, I wanted to reclaim the pieces of myself she'd buried. I arrived in Georgia just before Christmas, the air heavy with the scent of pine and the weight of unspoken truths. The house was decorated as always, twinkling lights, a towering tree, the same ornaments I'd helped hang as a child. But it felt like a stage, a performance of family that I no longer believed in. My mother was in the kitchen, baking pies, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. My father was in the living room, reading the paper. Caleb, now a senior in high school, gave me a quick hug before retreating to his phone. Bethany was there too, back from her new life in Atlanta, her diamond ring catching the light as she talked about her perfect house, her perfect husband. I felt like a ghost drifting through their world unseen. Nana Rose was weaker now, confined to her bed in the apartment above the garage. I spent most of my time with her, holding her hand, listening to her stories. She was fading, and the thought of losing her, the one person who'd always seen me, tore at my heart. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered one evening, her voice barely audible. "Don't let their fear dim your light." I nodded, tears in my eyes, but I wasn't sure I believed her. Strength felt like a fragile thing, easily crushed by the weight of the past. I waited until the day after Christmas to confront my mother. The house was quiet. The holiday chaos settled. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes, her back to me. I stood in the doorway, clutching Marcus's sketchbook, my heart pounding. "Mama?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." She stiffened her hands, pausing in the soapy water, but she didn't turn around. "About what, Liana?" she asked, her tone clipped like she already knew. I took a deep breath and told her about the DNA test, the results, the truth Nana Rose had shared. I told her how it felt to grow up feeling like I didn't belong, how her words, her silences, had cut me deeper than any knife. I told her about the family photo, the Christmas picture, the years of being pushed aside. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. "Why didn't you tell me about Marcus?" I asked. "Why did you let me think I was a mistake?" She turned then, her face pale, her eyes wide, with something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or shame? "You don't understand," she said, her voice low. "I was young, I had no choice." She told me her side, haltingly, like the words were being pulled from her. She'd loved Marcus, but her parents, my grandparents, had made it clear, if she kept him, kept me, she'd lose everything. She was 19, scared, and they'd convinced her that giving me up was the only way. But when Nana Rose fought for me, Clara agreed to raise me, to pretend I was James's daughter. "I did the best I could," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to protect you, protect me." I snapped, my anger spilling over. "You let me grow up thinking I wasn't enough. You let me feel like I was wrong for existing." She flinched, but I kept going, years of pain pouring out. I told her how her rejection had shaped me, how I'd fought to find my worth despite it. She sobbed, apologizing, but her words felt hollow. I wanted to forgive her, to bridge the gap between us, but the hurt was too raw, too deep. I left the kitchen, Marcus's sketchbook still in my hands, and didn't look back. That night, I sat with Nana Rose, telling her what had happened. She listened, her eyes heavy with sorrow. "Your mama's carrying her own pain," she said. "But that doesn't excuse what she did to you." She reached for a small box on her nightstand and handed it to me. Inside was a silver locket, simple but beautiful, with a tiny flower engraved on it. "Marcus gave this to your mama," she said. "She couldn't keep it, but I did. It's yours now." I opened it, expecting a photo, but it was empty. "You decide what goes inside," Nana Rose said. "You decide who you are." I returned to college in January, the locket around my neck, a reminder of the truth and the choice I had to make. My mother's apology hadn't healed me, but it had shifted something. I wasn't just a victim of her choices anymore. I was a woman with a story to tell, a life to build. I threw myself into my writing with a new purpose, channeling my pain into words that resonated with others. My essays were published in campus journals, then in small literary magazines. I started a blog sharing my journey of identity and discovery, and to my surprise, it found an audience, people, mostly young women, who felt like outsiders in their own lives. Aisha, now in her final semester, pushed me to take bigger risks. "You've got a voice, Liana," she said. "Use it." She helped me apply for a summer writing program in California, a prestigious workshop for emerging writers. When I was accepted with a full scholarship, I cried, not just for the opportunity, but for the girl I'd been the one who thought she'd never be enough. The program was intense, surrounded by talented writers from across the country, but I held my own. My mentor, a poet named Dr. Ellis, saw something in me. "Your work is fearless," she told me. "Keep telling your truth." That summer, I started searching for Marcus again, this time with more determination. I used the names from my DNA results, scouring social media, public records, anything I could find. I didn't know what I'd say if I found him, but I needed to know he was out there, that he was real. One night, after hours of searching, I found a lead, an artist named Marcus Tate, living in Chicago, whose bio mentioned murals and community projects. His photo showed a man in his 40s with graying hair and eyes that mirrored mine. My heart raced. Was this him? I wrote him a letter, pouring out my story, my mother, the DNA test, the sketchbook. I didn't know if he'd respond, or if he'd even want to know me, but sending it felt like a step toward claiming my own history. I didn't hear back right away, and the waiting was agony, but I kept moving forward. Back at school, I was elected editor of the literary magazine, a role that felt like a crown I'd earned through years of struggle. I organized readings, mentored younger writers, and started to see myself as a leader, someone who could make space for others the way Aisha and Javier had for me. By my senior year, I was applying to graduate programs in creative writing, dreaming of a career where I could tell stories that mattered. I won another writing contest, this time with a cash prize that let me buy a used car, a small, tangible sign of my independence. My blog grew, and I started getting messages from readers who said my words had helped them feel less alone. Each one felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I was building. one where I didn't need my family's validation to shine. But the past wasn't done with me. That fall, Nana Rose's health took a sharp turn. I flew home terrified I'd lose her before I could say goodbye. She was in the hospital, her breathing labored, but her spirit unbroken. "You're my legacy, Liana," she said, her hand weak in mine. "Keep going." She died 2 days later, and the grief was like nothing I'd ever known. At her funeral, my mother reached for me, tears in her eyes, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. I left Georgia with the locket and a promise to myself I'd live a life Nana Rose would be proud of. Nana Rose's death left a hole in my heart that nothing could fill, but it also lit a fire in me. I was 21, a senior in college, and determined to honor her by living boldly, unapologetically, as the woman she'd always seen in me. The locket she'd given me hung around my neck, a constant reminder of Marcus of the truth, and of my own power to choose who I'd become. I'd spent years fighting to prove I was enough, first to my family, then to myself, and now I was starting to believe it. But the journey wasn't over. The letter I'd sent to Marcus Tate lingered in the back of my mind, a question mark that could change everything. And as I stepped into the final stretch of college, I was about to discover just how far my voice could carry me. Back at school, I dove into my role as editor of the literary magazine, with a passion that surprised even me. I wasn't just organizing readings or editing submissions. I was creating a space where stories like mine, stories of struggle, identity, and resilience could thrive. The magazine's spring issue, themed Roots and Wings, became my love letter to everyone who'd ever felt like they didn't belong. I poured my heart into it, curating pieces from students who wrote about immigration, queerness, poverty, and everything in between. When the issue launched at a campus reading, the room was packed, and the energy was electric. For the first time, I felt like I was leading, not just surviving. Aisha, now in grad school, but still my biggest cheerleader, flew in for the event. She sat in the front row, grinning, as I read my own piece, a poem about the locket, about carrying a history I was still learning to claim. The applause was warm, but it was Aisha's hug afterward that meant the most. "You're a force, Liana," she said, her eyes shining. "Don't stop." Javier, who'd just returned from his gap year, was there too, snapping photos and teasing me about becoming famous. Their belief in me was a lifeline, a reminder that family wasn't always about blood. It was about who showed up. My blog was growing, too, reaching thousands of readers who connected with my story. I wrote about Nana Rose, about the DNA test, about the confrontation with my mother. I didn't hold back, and the vulnerability paid off. Comments poured in from women, some my age, some older, who'd felt invisible in their own families, who'd been told they weren't enough. "Your words make me feel seen," one wrote. "Keep telling the truth," said another. Each message was a spark, fueling my dream of becoming a writer who could change lives the way Ms. Harper and Dr. Ellis had changed mine. That spring, I got an email that stopped me in my tracks. It was from a small publishing house in Boston, asking if I'd consider turning my blog into a memoir. They'd found my work through the writing contest I'd won, and they saw potential in my story. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. A book, me, the girl who'd been left out of the family photo. It felt surreal, but I said yes, setting in motion a process that would force me to dig even deeper into my pain and my power. The memoir wasn't easy. Writing it meant reliving every rejection, every moment of doubt, but it also meant celebrating every victory. Ms. Harper's encouragement, Aisha's friendship, Nana Rose's love. I worked on it between classes late at night, pouring myself into every word. Dr. Ellis, my mentor from the summer program, read early drafts and pushed me to be fearless. "Don't just tell the story," she said. "Make it sing." So I did, weaving in the locket, the sketchbook, the DNA results, and the unanswered letter to Marcus. It was my truth, raw and unfiltered, and it felt like a reckoning. As graduation approached, I was juggling the memoir, my classes, and applications to MFA programs. I'd been accepted to one in New York, one in California, both with scholarships. The idea of moving to a new city, of starting fresh again, was thrilling but terrifying. I'd built a life in Massachusetts with friends who felt like family, but I knew I had to keep pushing forward. Nana Rose had called me her legacy, and I wanted to live up to that to create something lasting. Then one April morning, I got a response from Marcus Tate. The email was short, cautious, but it was him. He'd received my letter, he wrote, and he was still processing it. "I didn't know about you," he said. "I'm sorry for that. He asked if we could talk, maybe meet, but he needed time." My hands shook as I read it, a mix of joy and fear washing over me. He was real, he existed, and he hadn't rejected me, not yet. I wrote back, keeping it simple, saying I'd wait as long as he needed. The possibility of knowing him, of filling the empty space in the locket, was enough for now. Graduation was a blur of caps and gowns, hugs and tears. Aisha and Javier were there, cheering louder than anyone. My mother sent a card with a check, but she didn't come. My father texted congratulations. Caleb FaceTimed me, his grin wide, saying he was proud. Bethany posted a vague Instagram story about family milestones, but I didn't care. I'd stopped needing their approval. The locket hung against my chest as I walked across the stage, a reminder of where I'd come from and where I was going. After graduation, I moved to New York for the MFA program, renting a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, with savings from my contest prize and bookstore job. The city was overwhelming, loud, fast, alive, but it felt like the right place to become the writer I wanted to be. I worked on the memoir, taught writing workshops to pay the bills, and kept in touch with Marcus. We emailed back and forth, slowly building a connection. He was an artist, still painting murals, still passionate about community. He hadn't known about me, but he wanted to now. We planned to meet that summer, and the thought of it kept me up at night, equal parts hope and fear. My memoir was accepted for publication, that fall set to come out the following year. The editor called it a testament to resilience, and I cried when I signed the contract. It wasn't just a book, it was proof that my story mattered, that I mattered. I started getting invited to speak at small events, literary festivals, campus panels, sharing my journey with audiences who listened, nodded, cried. Each time I spoke, I felt Nana Rose's presence, her voice whispering, "Keep going." But the biggest moment came unexpectedly. A viral post on my blog, a piece about the locket, and what it meant to claim your own identity, caught the attention of a national magazine. They wanted to feature me in a series about young women breaking barriers. The interview was raw, emotional, and when it went live, it spread like wildfire. Suddenly, my story was everywhere, on social media, in group chats, even on a morning talk show. People were calling me an inspiration, a voice for the unseen. It was overwhelming, but it was also a turning point. I wasn't just Liana, the girl who didn't match. I was Liana, the woman who'd turned her pain into power. The magazine feature reached my family too. Caleb texted me, saying he'd read it and was sorry for not standing up for me. My father sent a long email, awkward but sincere, apologizing for his silence. My mother called, her voice trembling, asking if we could talk. I wasn't ready, but I told her maybe someday. Bethany predictably stayed silent, but I didn't need her validation anymore. The world was seeing me, and that was enough. As the memoir's release date approached, I prepared for a book tour, small but meaningful. I was nervous, but I was ready. The locket, still empty, was my anchor, a symbol of the journey I was still on. Marcus and I set a date to meet a coffee shop in Chicago, neutral ground. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I'd face it as myself. Not as the girl who'd been left out, but as the woman who'd found her way back. New York was a whirlwind, and at 22, I was learning to ride its chaos. My MFA program was intense, filled with late nights, sharp critiques, and moments of doubt that made me question if I could keep up. But every time I faltered, I touched the locket around my neck, felt the weight of Nana Rose's belief in me, and kept going. The memoir was set to release in a few months, and the anticipation was both thrilling and terrifying. I was no longer just writing my story. I was sharing it with the world, and that meant opening myself up to judgment, criticism, and maybe even healing. Marcus was out there too, a possibility I held close, like a flame I was afraid to let flicker out. I was building a life I'd never dared to dream of, but the past still tugged at me, demanding to be faced. The magazine feature had changed things. My inbox was flooded with messages from readers, some sharing their own stories of rejection, others thanking me for giving them courage. I'd walk to class and catch strangers glancing at me, whispering, "Is that her?" It was surreal, this sudden visibility, but it also felt right, like I was finally stepping into the light after years in the shadows. My professors noticed, too, encouraging me to lean into my platform. "You're not just a writer," one said. "You're a voice." That word voice stuck with me. I'd spent so long feeling silenced, and now I was being heard. I started getting invited to more events, podcasts, literary panels, even a keynote at a women's conference in Philadelphia. Each one was a chance to tell my story, to connect with people who saw themselves in my words. At the conference, I stood on a stage in front of hundreds, my voice steady as I talked about the family photo, the DNA test, the locket. I told them about Nana Rose, about Marcus, about choosing to define myself. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, and I saw women in the audience, wiping tears, nodding, raising their hands in solidarity. I left the stage shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that my story was bigger than me now. The book tour was small, but mighty: independent bookstores, college campuses, community centers. I'd read excerpts, answer questions, and sign copies, my hands trembling every time someone said, "This book changed me." One night in a tiny bookstore in Harlem, a young woman approached me, her eyes bright with tears. "I grew up like you," she said, "always the odd one out. Your story made me feel like I could keep going." I hugged her, my own tears falling, and thought of Nana Rose. This was her legacy too. Between the tour and my MFA, I was stretched thin, but I thrived on it. I taught more writing workshops, mostly for young people from marginalized communities, and found joy in helping them find their voices. I'd watch a shy teenager read their poem aloud, for the first time their voice growing stronger with each word, and feel a pride that rivaled anything I'd felt for myself. I was building something, a community, a purpose that went beyond my own pain. Marcus and I kept emailing, our conversations growing deeper. He shared stories about his life, his art, his community work, the family he'd never started. "I wish I'd known about you," he wrote once, and I could feel his regret through the screen. We talked about meeting, but he was hesitant. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid of disrupting my life. "You've built something incredible," he said. "I don't want to complicate it." But I wanted him in my life, not as a complication, but as a piece of the puzzle I was still assembling. We set a firm date, July, in Chicago, and I started counting down the days. The memoir's release was a turning point. It debuted to modest sales, but glowing reviews. Critics called it raw courageous, a testament to the power of self-discovery. I'd read the reviews late at night, half expecting them to vanish, but they were real. My story was real. The book started gaining traction, especially among young women, and I was invited to speak at bigger venues, a literary festival in D.C., a university in California. Each event was a chance to see my impact, to meet readers who carried my words like talismans. But success didn't erase the ache. My mother's call after the magazine feature had left me unsettled. She wanted to talk, to make things right, but I wasn't sure what that meant. I hadn't forgiven her, and I didn't know if I ever would. Caleb kept in touch, sending memes and updates about college applications, and I cherished his efforts, but he was still part of their world, a world that had excluded me. My father's email sat unanswered in my inbox, his apology too late to undo years of silence. Bethany predictably stayed distant, her life a glossy Instagram feed I no longer followed. One night, after a reading in Boston, I got an email from a journalist who'd read my book. She was working on a story about family secrets and wanted to interview me and my family. The idea made my stomach churn. I didn't want to drag my mother, father, or siblings into the spotlight, not out of loyalty, but because I wasn't sure I could face them again. I declined the interview, but the request planted a seed. Maybe it was time to go back to Georgia, not to reconcile, but to close the chapter on my terms. I flew home that spring, unannounced, my heart pounding as I drove to the house. It was smaller than I remembered the pecan trees bear in the early season. My mother was in the yard, tending her roses, and she froze when she saw me. Liana, she said, her voice, a mix of surprise and fear. I didn't hug her, didn't smile. I'm not here to stay, I said. I just need to say something. I told her about the memoir that tore the life I'd built. I told her how her choices had hurt me, how I'd spent years believing I was less because of her. And I told her I was done letting her define me. She cried, reaching for me, but I stepped back. I'm sorry, she said over and over, but it wasn't enough. I didn't need her apology anymore. I needed to let go. I left the locket on the porch swing, a symbol of the past I was releasing, and drove away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was freedom. I felt lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried too long. Back in New York, I prepared for Chicago. The meeting with Marcus was weeks away, and I was a bundle of nerves. What if he didn't like me? What if I wasn't what he expected? But I pushed the fears aside, focusing on the present. My MFA thesis, a collection of essays about identity, was coming together, and my advisor called it publishable. I was planning a second book, a novel this time inspired by the women I'd met on tour. And I was still teaching, still speaking, still writing, each step a brick in the life I was building. The memoir kept gaining momentum. A university selected it for their freshman reading program, and I was invited to give a commencement address at a small college in Ohio. Standing on that stage, looking out at a sea of graduates, I felt Nana Rose's presence. Your worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. I told them, my voice strong. You decide who you are. The applause was deafening, but the real victory was inside me. I'd made it not just out of Georgia, but into a life that was mine. As July approached, I packed for Chicago, my heart full of hope and uncertainty. Marcus was waiting, and so was the next chapter of my story. I didn't know what it would hold, but I knew I was ready, not as the girl who'd been left out, but as the woman who'd found her way. The plane to Chicago felt like a bridge between who I'd been and who I was becoming. At 22, I was a published author, a graduate student, a speaker whose words had touched thousands. But as I clutched Marcus's sketchbook in my lap, I was also a daughter, a girl who'd grown up believing she was a mistake now, on her way to meet the father she'd never known. The memoir's success, the speaking gigs, the MFA program, they were all proof of how far I'd come, but this meeting was personal. A chance to fill the empty space in the locket I'd left behind. I was nervous, my heart a tangle of hope and fear, but I was ready to face whatever came next. Chicago was warm and bustling, the skyline a jagged contrast to New York's chaos. Marcus had suggested a coffee shop in Hyde Park, a quiet place with big windows and worn wooden tables. I arrived early, my hands sweaty, as I ordered a latte I barely touched. When he walked in, I knew it was him before he said a word. He was taller than I'd imagined, his hair more gray than black, but his eyes, my eyes, were unmistakable. He carried a canvas bag, paint splattered like the jeans in Nana Rose's photo, and his smile was tentative, like he was as nervous as I was. Liana, he said, his voice soft but deep. I nodded, standing, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two strangers bound by a shared history. Then he hugged me, a quick, awkward embrace that felt like a promise. We sat, and the words came slowly at first. He told me about his life, his art, his work with kids in underserved neighborhoods, the quiet days he spent painting. He'd never married, never had other children, and when I asked why, he shrugged. Guess I was waiting for something I didn't know I'd lost. I told him my story, the parts he didn't know. The family photo, the DNA test, the confrontation with my mother. His face tightened when I mentioned Clara, but he didn't interrupt. I loved her, he said finally, his voice heavy. But I didn't know about you, if I had. He trailed off, and I saw the pain in his eyes, the years of what-ifs. I wanted to comfort him, to say it wasn't his fault, but I was still processing the weight of meeting him. We weren't father and daughter, not yet, but we were something two people trying to build a bridge across a chasm of lost time. We spent hours in that coffee shop trading stories, laughing, even crying. He showed me photos of his murals, vibrant, sprawling works that told stories of struggle and hope. I gave him a copy of my memoir, my hands shaking as I inscribed it. To Marcus, the piece I didn't know I was missing. He held it like it was fragile, promising to read it that night. When we parted, he hugged me again, longer this time, and said, "I want to be in your life, Liana, if you'll let me." I nodded, tears in my eyes, and promised to visit again. Back in New York, I felt like I was floating. Meeting Marcus hadn't erased the pain of my childhood, but it had given me something new, a connection to a part of myself I'd been denied. I threw myself into my MFA thesis, weaving his story into my essays, exploring what it meant to reclaim a lost history. My advisor loved the direction, calling it a love letter to resilience. I was also planning the next leg of my book tour, which had expanded after the memoir's growing buzz. Universities, libraries, even a festival in London wanted me to speak, and I was starting to believe I could make a career of this writing, speaking, teaching others to tell their truths. But the biggest moment came that fall when I was invited to a National Book Award ceremony in New York. My memoir had been shortlisted for a debut author prize, a long shot I hadn't dared hope for. The ceremony was glitzy, held in a Manhattan hotel, with chandeliers and black tie attire. I wore a deep blue dress, my curls loose and proud, and walked the red carpet feeling like I was in someone else's life. Aisha and Javier were there cheering from the audience, and Marcus sent a text, "So proud of you, Liana. You're shining. I didn't win, but being there surrounded by writers I admired was victory enough." My story had brought me to this stage, and no one could take that away. The awards night went viral thanks to a clip of my acceptance speech for a smaller community impact award. I'd spoken about the locket, about Nana Rose, about choosing your worth over others' rejection. The video spread across social media, and suddenly my name was everywhere on morning shows, in op-eds, even trending on X for a day. My publisher called it a cultural moment, and the memoir's sales spiked, landing it on a bestseller list. I was overwhelmed, but I leaned into it, agreeing to more interviews, more talks, determined to use this platform to amplify others' voices too. The spotlight reached Georgia, and with it came the confrontation I hadn't planned. My mother emailed asking to meet, saying she'd read the memoir and seen the awards clip. "I'm so proud," she wrote, but the words felt like a stranger's. Caleb called, saying the whole town was talking about me, and even Bethany had posted a vague congratulations online, as if she'd always been in my corner. My father sent flowers, a gesture that felt too little too late. I didn't respond right away, but the pressure was building. They wanted to be part of my success, but I wasn't sure I wanted them in my life. I agreed to meet my mother in Atlanta, neutral ground, a few weeks later. She looked older, her face lined with a weariness I hadn't noticed before. We sat in a quiet cafe, and she started with apologies, her voice breaking as she admitted her mistakes. "I was scared," she said. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong." She'd read my book, she said, and it had forced her to face the pain she'd caused. She wanted to make amends, to be my mother again. I listened, my heart a storm of anger and longing. I told her how her choices had shaped me, how I'd spent years believing I wasn't enough. "I needed you," I said, my voice cracking. "And you let me feel like I was nothing." She sobbed, reaching for my hand, but I didn't take it. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I didn't hate her anymore. I told her I needed time, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. As I left, I felt a weight lift, not forgiveness, but release. I'd faced her and I was still standing. The encounter shook me, but it also clarified something: my worth didn't depend on her or my family or anyone else. I returned to New York stronger, ready to keep building. Marcus and I stayed in touch, planning another visit. He sent me a painting, a small canvas of a flower, like the one on the locket, and I hung it in my apartment, a reminder of the roots I was claiming. My MFA was nearly done, and I was fielding offers to teach, to write, to speak. The future was wide open, and I was no longer the girl who'd been left out of the photo. At a final book tour stop in DC, I saw my impact in real time. A young woman in the audience asked how I'd found the courage to keep going. I touched the spot where the locket used to be and said I decided I was enough, even when they said I wasn't. The room erupted and I felt Nana Rose's spirit. Marcus's pride, my own strength. I was Liana, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. The DC reading lingered in my mind as I flew back to New York, the young woman's question echoing. How did you find the courage at 22? I was still figuring out the answer, but I knew it had something to do with the journey I'd been on. The pain, the truth, the people who'd seen me when I couldn't see myself. Nana Rose's locket was gone, left on that porch swing in Georgia, but its weight still lived in me, a reminder of the roots I'd uncovered and the wings I'd grown. Marcus was part of my life now, a quiet, steady presence, and the memoir had become a beacon for others. I wasn't done healing, but I was done hiding. My story was mine to tell, and I was ready to write its next chapter, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever felt left out of the picture. New York welcomed me back with its relentless energy, and I dove into the final months of my MFA program. My thesis was complete, a collection of essays that wove together my childhood, the DNA test, Marcus, and the locket's empty promise. My advisor called it a triumph, and I was already getting queries from publishers interested in a second book. I was teaching more workshops too, pouring my energy into students who reminded me of the girl I'd been shy, unsure, but brimming with potential. Each time one of them shared their work, their voice trembling, but growing stronger, I felt a surge of purpose. This was what I was meant to do, lift others up, the way Nana Rose, Ms. Harper Aisha, and Javier had lifted me. The memoir's success hadn't slowed. It was now in its third printing, translated into Spanish and French, and I was fielding invitations to speak internationally: London, Toronto, even a festival in Cape Town. The viral awards clip had made me a recognizable name, and while the attention was daunting, I leaned into it. I wanted my story to reach as many people as possible, to show them that worth isn't something you're given, it's something you claim. My blog, now a platform with tens of thousands of followers, was a space for those stories too. I featured guest posts from readers, creating a community of voices that echoed my own. Marcus and I were building something real. We met again in Chicago that fall, this time for a weekend. He took me to his studio, a cluttered space, filled with canvases and the sharp smell of paint. He showed me a mural he was working on, a vibrant collage of faces, each one telling a story of resilience. "This one's you," he said, pointing to a figure with wild curls and eyes like ours holding a book. I cried, not just for the gesture, but for the fact that I had a father who saw me. We were still learning each other, but every conversation, every visit, felt like a step towards something whole. My family, though, was a different story. My mother's tearful plea in Atlanta hadn't bridged the gap between us. She kept reaching out, letters, texts, even a package with old photos of me as a baby, but I wasn't ready to let her back in. Caleb was the exception, visiting me in New York during his college break. We walked through Central Park, talking about everything and nothing, and for the first time I felt like he saw me as more than his weird sister. "I'm sorry I didn't get it back." Then he said, his voice low, "You're kind of a badass now." I laughed, hugging him, and realized I could love him without needing the rest of them. Bethany surprised me with a message after the awards clip went viral. "Proud of you, sis," she wrote with a heart emoji that felt like a performance. I didn't respond. My father's flowers and email sat unanswered too. I wasn't angry anymore, not like I'd been, but I didn't owe them my forgiveness. I'd built a life without their validation, and that was enough. Still, a part of me wondered if I'd ever want them back, if time would soften the edges of my hurt. One winter night, I got an email that changed everything. A major streaming platform wanted to option my memoir for a limited series. They saw it as a coming-of-age story with universal appeal, and they wanted me to consult on the script. I sat in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, staring at the offer, my heart racing. A TV show, my life on screen. It was beyond anything I'd imagined, but it also terrified me. Sharing my story in a book was one thing. Seeing it acted out with my family's flaws laid bare was another. I called Aisha, who screamed with excitement, and Javier, who said, "You're about to be a legend." Marcus, when I told him, was quiet for a moment, before saying, "Make sure they get your heart right." I signed the deal nervous, but determined to tell the story authentically. The producers flew me to LA for meetings, and I found myself in rooms with writers and directors who treated my words like they mattered. I pushed for diversity in the cast and crew, for a focus on the emotional journey over sensationalism. It was surreal sitting at those tables, a girl from a small Georgia town, shaping a project that could reach millions. But it felt right, like the next step in Nana Rose's legacy. The series deal brought more attention, and with it, an unexpected invitation. My hometown's library of all places asked me to give a talk. They'd never supported me growing up, had barely stocked my book, but now they wanted to claim me as a local hero. I almost said no, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of that family photo, the lawn where I'd been pushed aside. Maybe it was the chance to stand in that town, not as the girl who didn't match, but as the woman who'd rewritten her story. I went back to Georgia that spring, my heart a mix of nerves and resolve. The library was packed, neighbors, old classmates, even people who'd whispered about me years ago. My mother was there sitting in the back, her face unreadable. Caleb stood next to her, grinning. I didn't see Bethany or my father, and I was glad. I didn't need them. I spoke about the memoir, about Marcus, about the locket, and what it meant to choose your own worth. I didn't sugarcoat the pain, how this town, this family had made me feel like I didn't belong. But I also talked about the strength I'd found, the community I'd built, the life I was living. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. People lined up to shake my hand, to share their own stories, to say they were sorry for not seeing me back then. My mother approached, tears in her eyes, but I kept my distance. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice shaking. I nodded, but I didn't invite her closer. Caleb hugged me, whispering, "You killed it." I left the library feeling lighter, like I'd closed a door without needing to lock it. Back in New York, I kept building. The series was in pre-production, my second book was taking shape, and I was planning a writing retreat for young women of color, funded by a grant I'd won. Marcus visited, and we spent a weekend wandering the city, talking about art and identity and the future. "You're my daughter," he said one night, over pizza in my apartment, and I cried not from pain, but from joy. I stood on my fire escape one evening, looking out at the city's lights, and thought of Nana Rose. "Your worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation." I whispered her words, now my own. I didn't know if I'd ever fully forgive my family, but I didn't need to. I had Marcus, Asha, Javier, Caleb, and a community of readers who saw me. I had my voice, my story, my truth. And somewhere in a small Georgia town, a library held a book with my name on it, a symbol of the girl who'd been left out and the woman who'd found her way. The locket's empty space was filled not with a photo, but with me, Liana, whole enough and free.